It was one of those grey English afternoons when the rain does not fall so much as it settles, a quiet and persistent drizzle that softens the edges of the world. I remember it clearly for two reasons. First, because I had not seen Hercule Poirot in nearly 5 weeks, an astonishing interval given our usual companionship. And second, because of the woman in the window. We had come to spend a weekend in the countryside, at the invitation of an old acquaintance of mine, Colonel Archibald Godfrey, recently retired from military service and newly settled at Willowbank Terrace, a long, ivy-clad manor overlooking the river. The house was handsome in a way that suggested old English respectability, but it possessed, if I may say, an air of quiet unease, as though some shadow clung to it that the sunlight could not penetrate. As we arrived, I noticed her at once, a woman standing at the drawing-room window, facing the garden and the pale sheets of rain. She did not turn her head as the motor car approached. She simply watched the rain with still, intent focus, her hands clasped loosely before her. I could not have said why, but the sight unsettled me. Poirot, stepping from the car with the fastidious care of a man alighting onto a museum floor rather than gravel, observed her too. "Ah," he murmured, "there is grief in that stance. Grief and reflection. That woman, Hastings, she watches not the rain, but her thoughts. You can tell that from all the way out here?" I asked, though I should have known better. Poirot only smiled, and the tips of his elegant mustache lifted like a pair of amused feathers. We were greeted at the door by Colonel Godfrey himself, broad and loud as ever, though a touch of fatigue lay beneath his jovial exterior. "Poirot, Hastings, splendid to see you both. Come in, don't mind the weather. Damnable stuff, but we make do, eh?" Inside, the drawing-room was warm, the fire crackling pleasantly. But the woman at the window did not turn until the Colonel spoke. My wife, Clara. She looked at us then, her face pale, beautiful, and marked with a sorrow so profound that I felt, in that instant, I was intruding upon something deeply private. When she extended her hand, it was with grace, but no warmth. We took tea. Small talk was attempted. Yet a tension lay upon the room, unspoken but unmistakable. It was during this unease that another guest entered. A young woman of about 24, with striking dark eyes and the kind of careless, effortless beauty that suggests vanity if one is inclined to judge, or simply youth if one is inclined to forgive it. "This is Miss Evangeline Drew," Colonel Godfrey said. "She is staying with us for a time." Clara Godfrey's teacup trembled just once before she steadied it. Poirot noticed. Of course, he noticed. But the true disturbance came only when the clock chimed 5. The butler entered, looking strangely pale. "Colonel, I believe you should come with me at once." We followed him to the library. And there, in the center of the ornate room, lay a man, face down on the polished wood floor, his hand still clutching at the corner of a heavy desk. A silver letter opener protruded from his back, and a dark stain was spreading across the rich carpet. Clara Godfrey gasped. Evangeline Drew turned away, one hand pressed to her lips. The Colonel swore under his breath. Poirot, his expression sharpening to pure focus, bent, not to touch the body, but to look. Who is he?" I managed to ask. Colonel Godfrey's voice was strained. "Mr. Lionel Avery, my solicitor. He came to discuss a matter of family trust and property. We were to finalize the paperwork today. I cannot imagine." Poirot raised a hand gently. "No, Colonel, you must imagine. Everyone must imagine. And remember, that is how the truth begins." He stepped back, eyes narrowing, his entire being intent. "The body is still warm. The rain outside began in earnest only 1 hour ago. The murderer has not been gone long." The room fell into a tense silence. And then Clara Godfrey spoke, her voice soft, distant, as though spoken from a dream. "He knew something," she said. "Something meant to be kept hidden." Poirot looked at her, not with surprise, but with quiet, profound curiosity. "And you knew it also, madame?" Her eyes did not leave the rain-soaked window beyond the library door. "No," she whispered, "but I feared it." Poirot nodded, almost kindly. "Then, mes amis, a murder has been committed in this house. The circle is closed, the rain ensures no tracks, and the murderer remains among us." He turned, his gaze sweeping each of us in turn. "We shall not leave until we find the truth." The shock of the discovery lingered in the atmosphere like the damp chill of the rain outside. We returned to the drawing room, though no one sat at ease now. The tea tray remained untouched, the cups cooling in silence. The house at Willowbank Terrace, moments ago merely sombre, now felt claustrophobic, as though the very walls had drawn closer. Poirot stood near the hearth, gently warming his hands. Not out of comfort, I felt, but out of habit. The familiar gesture of a man collecting his thoughts, placing every detail into order. Colonel Godfrey paced the length of the room, rubbing his brow in distress. "Good Lord, I cannot fathom it," he muttered. "Avery Sugg, murdered. Here, in my home, and at such a moment." "At such a moment?" Poirot echoed softly, without looking up. The colonel froze, as though realizing he had said too much. "Well, yes, there were certain financial matters under discussion, family matters, personal matters, but none that would lead to this." Poirot's eyes opened, dark, sharp, assessing. But he said nothing. Not yet. Clara Godfrey sat again at the window, her posture unchanged. I watched her carefully. She had not wept. She did not tremble. And yet she was not composed. Rather, she seemed removed, as though her thoughts existed in some distant room we could not enter. Miss Evangeline Drew stood near the piano, arms crossed, her expression shifting between defiance and unease. She was restless, like an actress waiting for her cue, though unsure whether she wished to perform. Poirot cleared his throat with a soft, polite sound. "If you permit, Colonel Godfrey, we shall proceed with order. There are 5 persons in this house who matter to this investigation." He lifted a finger, elegant as a conductor beginning a symphony. 1. Colonel Archibald Godfrey, owner of the house and host to the deceased. 2. Madame Godfrey. He bowed his head respectfully toward Clara, who did not acknowledge him. 3. Mademoiselle Evangeline Drew, who is currently residing here. Evangeline's chin lifted a fraction, a reaction one might miss, were one, not Poirot. 4, Poirot continued, your butler, Reeves, and 5, your maid, Lucy, a small staff for a house of this size. The estate has been difficult to maintain since, Colonel Godfrey began, and then stopped again. Since the change in finances, Poirot supplied, with a hint of gentle insistence. Godfrey hesitated before nodding. Poirot turned, his voice taking on a tone both light and precise, the tone of a surgeon asking a patient to describe the first hints of pain. Now, each of you will tell me where you were at the time when the unfortunate Mr. Avery was killed. We begin with the colonel. Godfrey straightened as though addressing a superior officer. I was in my study across the hall. Reeves can confirm. He brought me correspondence at 4:30. Poirot looked to Reeves, who bowed his head. Yes, sir, that is correct. And after that? Poirot asked. I remained there. Writing. I did not hear any disturbance. Poirot allowed the statement to settle without comment. He turned next to Clara. Madame, and you? Clara did not turn from the window. When she spoke, her voice was low, almost hollow. I've been here, watching the rain. Since when? Since some time before 4 o'clock. I do not know precisely. Poirot exchanged the smallest glance with me. a signal that the imprecision, though understandable, was noted. "And you, Mademoiselle Drew?" Evangeline's dark eyes flicked quickly to Clara, then away. "I was in my room," she said. "Reading." "And can anyone confirm that?" Poirot asked. "No," she replied. "I was alone." Poirot neither nodded nor frowned. His neutrality at such moments was almost eerie. "And Reeves? Lucy? They must be called." The butler stepped back and returned moments later with Lucy, a timid young woman with anxious hands and a tendency to look anywhere except at the person addressing her. "I was in the kitchen," she said immediately, almost before Poirot had asked. "I didn't leave. I heard nothing, I swear." Reeves spoke similarly, calm, deliberate, respectful. "I was assisting in setting the dinner service. I did not go near the library, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot studied them both, not with distrust, but with careful distance, like a chess player examining odd but plausible moves. Colonel Godfrey exhaled heavily. "Poirot, surely you can see. None of us would do such a thing. Avery was a friend, a guest." Poirot raised one eyebrow, a subtle, devastating gesture. "But one does not murder for dislike, mon ami. One murders for fear, or necessity, or love, or money, and sometimes one murders for pride." The room was silent. Poirot moved then, lightly, as though conversing rather than interrogating. "Mr. Avery was here to finalize documents of inheritance, yes?" The colonel stiffened. "Yes." "And the matter was in dispute?" Poirot asked softly. Something flickered in the colonel's expression, something pained, defensive, and then vanished. "A family arrangement. Nothing more." Poirot gave a tiny bow. "Bien, then already we have motive. But motive alone does not make the murderer. We must examine character, opportunity, fear, desperation." He stepped back, folding his hands. "The circle is closed. The murderer is among us. None shall leave this house, and we shall proceed with order." His eyes narrowed, thoughtful, keen. For the truth, mes amis, is always simple. It is the lies that are complicated. Though he had already begun to ask questions, it was in this next hour that Poirot truly arrived. Not just into the house at Willowbank Terrace, but into the affair itself. If the discovery of the body had cast unease, Poirot now placed the house under the unmistakable atmosphere of inquiry, precision, and quiet scrutiny. No one dared leave the drawing-room until he dismissed them. Even Colonel Godfrey, who ordinarily had the air of a man accustomed to being obeyed, waited with visible restraint. Poirot took a seat, neatly, elegantly, his shoes aligned, his cuffs immaculate, and surveyed the room as a general surveys a battlefield before the first move. "You will forgive me," he began, "for what must be a most uncomfortable afternoon. But murder, mes amis, has a way of disturbing the peace, and of revealing the truth that lies beneath the calm appearances of daily life." His eyes shifted to Clara Godfrey, who still sat at the window, rainlight blurring around her like a halo of melancholy. "You were acquainted with Mr. Avery for many years, madame." Her reply came without hesitation, but without emotion. "Yes, Lionel Avery has been my husband's solicitor since before our marriage. He has dined here many times." "And you were fond of him?" She turned her face slightly, enough to show her profile, pale and drawn. "No, I was not." A small ripple of surprise passed through the room, except, of course, for Poirot. He merely nodded. "And why not, madame?" Clara's fingers tightened just slightly against one another. "There are some men," she said quietly, "whose courtesy is a surface. Underneath lies coldness, and knowledge that one would rather they did not possess." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You believed he knew something about you?" She did not answer, but the silence itself was an answer. At once Colonel Godfrey stepped forward. "Clara, my dear, there is no need. Poirot held up a single finger. The colonel stopped mid-sentence. No, it is important we allow the truth to speak for itself. Poirot then turned smoothly to Evangeline Drew. And you, mademoiselle? Did you like Mr. Avery? Her answer came swift, too swift. Of course. Why would I not? Poirot gave a soft little hum. Sometimes, mademoiselle, the dislike is not spoken, but it is there. Seen here. He tapped his chest lightly. In the quickening of the breath, the tightening of the mouth, the glance that avoids. Evangeline flushed, a bright, guilty rose. She did not reply. Poirot moved no further in questioning for the moment. Instead, his gaze drifted, slowly, deliberately, around the room. Over the mantel, the painting of a hunting scene, the table where the tea cooled, the faint, damp footprints in the hallway beyond. It was as though he were arranging invisible shapes, constructing a map known only to him. Then he rose. "Come, Hastings," he said. "We shall look at the scene of the crime." We left the others, who remained in tense, watching silence. The library was dim, the curtains drawn halfway. The rain tapped gently on the glass. Lionel Avery's body had been respectfully covered with a linen sheet, though the dark stain beneath reminded one unmistakably of the violence that had occurred. Poirot did not approach the body first. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the room, slowly, carefully. His feet made no sound upon the carpet. He observed the desk, the open ink bottle, the blotting paper, a pen lying sideways, though its alignment was clearly offset from habit or instinct. "How often does the colonel work in here?" Poirot asked. "Daily," I replied. "He told us as much." Poirot nodded. "And yet Hastings, behold, the dust on the frame of the painting there, thick, neglected, but the blotter is fresh. The surface polished recently. Very recently." He looked toward the fireplace with gentle curiosity. A room prepared for conversation, not work. A room arranged for performance. Très curieux. Poirot now finally approached the body. He did not touch the sheet, nor the handle of the blade. He merely crouched, observing the manner in which the dead man's hand still clutched at the desk. "Not surprise," Poirot murmured, "nor struggle." He was leaning forward. Reading. The attack was from behind, swift, deliberate, precise. He straightened. There is no sign of a quarrel. No papers scattered, no forced entry. The murderer stood close, spoke perhaps gently, and then struck. Poirot's voice grew quiet, thoughtful. This was not an act of passion, it was an act of decision. I felt a shiver run through me. "Poirot," I said, "do you think—" He held up a hand once more. "Do not think ahead, Hastings. Thinking ahead leads to error. One must think exactly as far as the truth takes us, and no further." He then looked toward the rain-streaked window, the view opening to the garden beyond, blurred and grey. "Hastings, mon ami," he said softly, "tell me, when we arrived, what did we see?" "The woman at the window," I said. "Clara." "Yes," he nodded, "the woman who watches the rain." He turned back to the library door. There is always one person in every case who already knows the truth. He paused, and a faint, chilling smile touched his lips. "We have not yet discovered why she watched the rain, but we shall." After Poirot's brief examination of the library, we returned to the drawing room, where the household remained in various states of distress. Colonel Godfrey stood stiffly with his back to the fire, staring into the flames as though hoping they might offer clarity. Evangeline Drew leaned once again near the piano, though now she tapped her fingers against the polished wood, a nervous, irritated rhythm. Clara Godfrey had not moved from her position at the window. Reeves and Lucy waited quietly along the wall, both clearly uncomfortable. Poirot resumed his seat, lacing his fingers lightly. "Now," he said gently, "we shall speak each one in turn. Not interrogation, simply conversation. We will begin with the butler. Reeves stepped forward, his expression solemn but controlled. You understand, Reeves, Poirot said, that I value truth. Even the smallest detail, if remembered faithfully, can illuminate the entire darkness. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. Good. Tell me, please, what you observed today. Reeves paused, not to fabricate, but to build his memory with precision. Mr. Avery arrived shortly after 3:30. He asked to see the colonel at once. They spoke in the study for some time. I could hear the tone of conversation, but not the words. The colonel raised his voice only once. Mr. Avery remained calm. Poirot made a small sound, interest, not surprise. And after the conversation, he asked. They came to the drawing room. Tea was brought. Mrs. Godfrey was here already. Miss Drew joined a few minutes later. The atmosphere was strained. Poirot lifted a brow. Ah? In what way strained? Reeves chose his words deliberately. Mrs. Godfrey seemed troubled. Mr. Avery attempted conversation, but she answered only briefly. Miss Drew appeared uneasy. The colonel tried to maintain chair. And then, Poirot prompted. Mr. Avery requested to speak to the colonel again, privately. They went to the library. The colonel returned 5 minutes later and went to his study. Mr. Avery remained in the library alone. That was the last I saw him alive. Poirot nodded. You saw no one else enter the library? No, sir. Poirot sat back slightly. Merci, Reeves. That was very orderly. He turned next to Lucy, the maid, who stepped forward timidly. Lucy, Poirot began, you were in the kitchen? But you see and hear more than others might think. Tell me, did anything strike you as unusual today? Lucy's hands twisted in her apron. Only Miss Drew, she said in a small voice. Evangeline's head snapped up sharply. What about me? Lucy swallowed. You were crying, earlier, before tea. A stillness fell across the room. Evangeline's expression hardened, defensive, angry. That means nothing, she said. I had a headache. I was tired. I wasn't crying about him. Poirot tilted his head, watching her, not judging, merely observing. And yet you deny before being accused, he murmured. Her face colored. It does not matter, she insisted. Everything matters, Poirot said softly. Everything. He dismissed the servants for now. Reeves bowed. Lucy nearly fled. Poirot now turned toward Evangeline Drew. Mademoiselle, he said, come. Let us speak as friends. You have known the Godfrey household how long? She hesitated. 6 months. And yet, Poirot said pleasantly, you are treated, how shall I say, not as a guest, nor a governess, not a servant, something between. Her jaw tightened. I am a companion to Mrs. Godfrey. Poirot nodded. To comfort her. Yes. And does she need comfort? At this, Clara Godfrey stirred. The first visible movement in some time. Evangeline lifted her chin. Yes, she said simply. She does. Poirot leaned forward slightly. So, tell me, mademoiselle, what was the subject of Mr. Avery's conversation with the colonel today? Evangeline's eyes flicked, not to the colonel, but to Clara. That was all Poirot required. You see, he said softly, to no one in particular. We do not need answers spoken. Silence reveals much more. The colonel stepped forward abruptly. Poirot, enough. I will not have my family prodded like criminals. Poirot's voice remained calm. Your family, mon colonel, is not on trial. Truth is. He rose now, moving toward the window, toward Clara. Madame Godfrey, he said gently. Do you wish to speak, or shall I speak in your place? Her eyes closed. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. My husband has been altering the inheritance. The estate is failing. There are debts, large ones. Lionel Avery came today to finalize the new will. Evangeline looked toward her sharply. Clara continued, still looking out at the rain. In the new will, I lose everything. The house, the land, even my personal funds. It will all go to... She stopped. Poirot finished the sentence for her. Softly, gravely. To Miss Evangeline Drew. A stunned silence followed. The colonel turned scarlet. It was temporary. It was practical. Clara's health, her fragility. She would not manage the estate. Clara did not look at him. Poirot's voice was velvet, but velvet drawn over steel. Sir, we have motive, he murmured. The strongest motive of all. His eyes swept the room. Not accusing, not triumphant, simply aware. But motive, mes amis, is only the first thread. And there are many threads, and many lies yet unspoken. He stepped away from the window. The murderer has revealed themselves already, in the contradictions, in the silences, in the smallest of words. He glanced toward the library door. But we shall not name them, not yet. The atmosphere in the drawing-room had changed, charged now with something sharp and uneasy. The revelation of the revised will, that Evangeline Drew, and not Clara Godfrey, was to inherit Willowbank Terrace, cast a long and unsettling shadow across every face. And yet Poirot, rather than pressing further, suggested we take a short recess. Let each of you, he said pleasantly, reflect. The truth likes to breathe. But I knew better than to mistake his calm for idleness. Poirot was watching. Always watching. Every glance, every silence, every breath became part of the structure he was building in that precise and elegant mind. As the others dispersed, the colonel to his study, Clara to the dim corridor, Evangeline to the stairs, Poirot motioned for me to follow. We returned again to the library. The rain outside had sharpened to a steady patter. The fire hissed and crackled, casting flickers of light across the sheet-covered form on the floor. Poirot paced slowly, the way a man might walk a labyrinth he has walked many times before. Hastings, he said suddenly, tell me, what is the most dangerous thing in the mind of a murderer? I hesitated. Hatred? None. Hatred is loud. It is clumsy. It leaves traces. No, the most dangerous thing is certainty. The murderer believes the plan perfect, and so they fail to guard the smallest detail. Always, there is a detail. He stopped before the desk. Observe. On the blotter lay a sheet of paper, cream-colored, finely textured, at first glance, untouched. But Poirot pointed to the faintest indentation. Someone wrote and removed. A note here. I leaned closer. True enough, the faint pressure marks of handwriting could still be seen. But how can we read it? I asked. A mirror, some graphite, and patience, Poirot replied. But later, now we witness something else. He pointed to the carpet, the thick, ornate rug beneath Avery's body. Hastings, look, the blood has spread outward, evenly. Yet the body lies not in the center of the stain, but slightly forward. I frowned. Meaning, the body was moved? Only a little, very little. But yes. Poirot tapped his temple. Moved by someone who feared it appeared too staged, yet by correcting, they left a second error. I felt a small thrill. Poirot had found something. Before I could ask further, footsteps sounded in the doorway. It was Reeves. Monsieur Poirot, he said quietly, Inspector Galloway from the county police has arrived. Poirot sighed, not with dread, but with the resignation of a man who must now deal with an enthusiastic but unsubtle mind. Inspector Galloway was tall, broad, and so thoroughly English he seemed carved from the countryside itself. His moustache, I regret to say, was large, bristling, and tragically shapeless. Had Poirot seen it in another context, he would have wept. "Well," Galloway declared, upon being shown the body, "open and shut, is it not? These domestic murders always are." Poirot's eyelid gave a slight quiver, the closest he ever came to wincing. "Indeed," Poirot said politely. "Oh yes, clear as day," the inspector went on. "The wife? Jealousy, financial pressure. Probably quarreled, grabbed the nearest object." "The nearest object?" Poirot repeated softly. "The letter opener, yes," Galloway said, as though granting Poirot a point he had already proven. Poirot inclined his head. "But you see, Inspector, the letter opener was taken not from the desk." He stepped aside and pointed to a small lacquered case. "It was taken from there, a deliberate choice, not a crime of passion, and there was no quarrel. The room shows no sign of it." Galloway blinked, but barreled onward. "Well, be that as it may, she had the strongest motive, didn't she? The will. Mrs. Godfrey loses everything. She was desperate." Poirot turned slowly to Clara Godfrey, who had returned silently to the doorway. She looked peaceful, empty. "No," she said softly. "I was not desperate. I was resigned." Poirot watched her a moment longer, then turned to the inspector. "Yet you will arrest her." "Of course I will," Galloway said. "The motive is clear. The opportunity is clear. The rest can sort itself later." He stepped toward Clara, and that was the moment Poirot acted. Swiftly, sharply, with authority that filled the room like a crack of lightning. "No!" The inspector froze. Poirot's voice was no longer velvet. It was steel. "If you arrest Madame Godfrey now, you will end the investigation. The true murderer will believe themselves safe. They will make no move. They will hide their final mistake, and the truth will be lost." Galloway hesitated, but Poirot did not waver. "This woman is not the murderer." The silence that followed was absolute. Even I felt stunned. Galloway swallowed. "And your reasoning?" Poirot's gaze swept the room, clear and certain. "Because Madame Godfrey," he said softly, "is the only person in this house who has not lied." He turned from the inspector, and he did not look back. The inspector, though bristling visibly at being stalled, reluctantly agreed to postpone Mrs. Godfrey's arrest. Poirot's declaration had landed like a stone in a still pond, the ripples of it spreading silently through every mind in the house. Colonel Godfrey looked torn between relief and bewilderment. Evangeline Drew's face, however, was the more interesting study. A flicker of something, fear, shock, disappointment, crossed her expression before she smoothed it into an icy neutrality. Poirot saw it. He did not react. Clara, for her part, simply turned and resumed her seat by the window, the rain once more her silent companion. Nothing seemed to move her. Nothing altered her slow, unbroken gaze. Poirot addressed the room with gentle composure. "It is time," he said softly, "for clarity. It is not enough to speak. We must observe. It is in human behavior that the truth reveals itself." He nodded to Reeves. "Arrange tea in the drawing-room. We will speak together as if we are friends." "Tea?" Inspector Galloway sputtered, absolutely scandalized. "There has been a murder." Poirot turned elegantly. "And the murderer drinks tea, Inspector." There was no arguing with him. We moved to the drawing-room once more. The tea service was set. The atmosphere was wrong for such gentility, and yet the ritual of it, the pouring, the clinking of spoons, acted like fine surgical instruments, slicing open the quiet. Poirot remained standing, one hand lightly resting on the back of an armchair. "Madame Godfrey," he began, "may we speak of your sadness?" Clara blinked just once. Slow, weary. "I am not sad," she said. "Sadness is when one hopes for change. I do not hope." Poirot inclined his head. "Not in pity, but respect. And you have been this way, long before today. Yes, since before Miss Drew's arrival. Colonel Godfrey flinched. Evangeline's fingers tightened around her teacup, though her expression remained composed. Clara spoke quietly, almost gently. Yes. Poirot shifted his gaze to the colonel. You brought Mademoiselle Drew into the house, he said, as a companion for your wife. You believed it would ease her melancholy. The colonel nodded. Yes, she was recommended. And Clara was growing more distant. I thought a friend, a bright young presence, might bring her some warmth. Poirot raised one brow. And did it? Silence. Clara answered for him. No. Evangeline's lips pressed together, but whether in guilt or resentment I could not say. Poirot continued softly. Mademoiselle Drew, you are young, charming, intelligent. But this house has sadness, yes? A cloud, and one who lives beneath a cloud does not easily welcome the sun. Evangeline's composure cracked just for a breath. I tried, she said, and suddenly the veneer of cold poise gave way, revealing something sharp beneath. Frustration, exhaustion, perhaps even hurt. I have listened to her silence day after day. I have walked with her by the river while she did not speak. I was kind to her. I sat beside her every evening, and she never once looked at me. Do you know what it is to be unseen in the place where you live? Poirot nodded, slowly. Oui, it is a terrible thing. Clara did not react, or perhaps she reacted too deeply for expression. Poirot turned his gaze, very gently, to Evangeline. So, let us speak plainly. You were to inherit the estate. Evangeline's throat tightened. I did not want it, she whispered. I only wanted to be valued. And with those words, scarcely more than a sigh, the room shifted. Colonel Godfrey looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. But Poirot did not allow the emotional current to distract him. He stepped closer. Very small, very precise steps. Mademoiselle, he said, you were crying earlier today. Evangeline did not deny it this time. Yes. Because of Mr. Avery? A pause. A breath. Yes, she whispered. Poirot lowered his voice so that even I had to lean closer to hear. And was it because he threatened you? The effect was immediate. Evangeline gasped. The colonel stared. Clara turned her head, just slightly, as though awakening. Poirot continued. Mr. Avery was a solicitor, and solicitors know secrets. He knew that the will favored you. He also knew, perhaps, how it appeared to others. He may have warned you, or demanded something, or threatened to withdraw his support. Evangeline's composure collapsed then, not into tears, but into fury. He told me, she said through clenched teeth, that the colonel would never truly choose me, that it was a convenience, that I was temporary, a replacement in a household where I would never belong. Poirot nodded, as though this confirmed something already known to him. And so you hated him? Evangeline stared at him. No, she whispered. I believed him. That, I think, was the first moment that Clara Godfrey looked at Evangeline with anything like recognition. Not warmth, but understanding of shared suffering. Poirot spoke then, not to accuse, but to set the stage. Very good. Now we see the emotional landscape, but emotion alone is not murder. He turned away, slowly, deliberately. No, the murderer is calm at this moment, silent, watching. His eyes slid, just briefly, to the doorway, where Reeves stood, not startled, not uncomfortable, perfectly still. Too still. Poirot smiled, faintly. The game, he said softly, has begun. It was nearing 7 o'clock when the house seemed to grow darker, though the lamps had been lit. The rain had not ceased. It pressed against the windows with a soft and steady insistence, as though the world outside wished to come in. Poirot, having concluded his delicate probing during tea, suggested that each member of the household retire briefly to collect themselves. The inspector grumbled at such leniency, but Poirot insisted. "A murderer who believes himself unwatched," he murmured, "will show his hand." I accompanied him to the hall as the others dispersed to their rooms. "You believe we are close?" I asked quietly. Poirot smiled, not triumphantly, but thoughtfully. "Close, yes, but not ready. There is one more move the murderer must make before the shape of the truth is complete. One more piece must fall." I did not ask what piece. I had learned that Poirot, like an artist, preferred to paint the picture before naming what it depicted. It could not have been more than 20 minutes later when the house was roused by a cry. Sharp, startled, echoing from the upper floor. Poirot and I exchanged a glance and hurried toward the sound. The source was the corridor upstairs. And there, near the end, Evangeline Drew stood, her hands clasped to her mouth, her breath shaking. "What has happened?" Poirot asked. She pointed, speechless, toward the door of Clara Godfrey's room. At once, Poirot pushed the door open. Clara lay collapsed beside her writing desk, her body crumpled in an unnatural angle. A small bottle lay on the carpet, its contents spilled. Beside it, a glass. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Poirot!" I gasped. "She's—" Poirot was already kneeling, his precision intact even under urgency. He examined her pulse, her breath, her eyes. "Not dead," he said sharply, "but nearly. Hastings, call Reeves quickly." I ran. Reeves fetched smelling salts and sent Lucy rushing to summon the village doctor, who lived a quarter-mile down the road. Poirot directed us with calm clarity. Clara, pale as rainlight, breathed faintly, trembling. Poirot lifted the bottle. "Laudanum," he murmured. "Strong, enough to still a heart, taken all at once." The inspector stormed in a moment later. "Attempted suicide," he declared at once. "Guilt, it proves everything." Poirot rose, turning slowly, very slowly, to face him. "No." The certainty in his voice was so stark that the room itself seemed to draw still. "No?" the inspector sputtered. Poirot held out the bottle. "There are fingerprints, but not hers." The inspector blinked. Evangeline, standing in the doorway, gasped. Colonel Godfrey hurried forward, his voice hoarse and breaking. "Clara! Clara, my dear, why—" She stirred, her eyelids fluttered. For a moment, her voice, weak and distant, emerged like a whisper from far away. "I did not choose this." Poirot nodded. "I know, madame." Clara sank back again, barely conscious. Poirot turned to the colonel. "Someone wished it to appear as though your wife took her own life," he said, "either to escape guilt or grief, to close the matter, to end suspicion. But she did not do this of her own will." The colonel stared at the bottle as though it were a serpent. "My God," he whispered, "you mean someone tried to kill my wife?" Poirot gave a small, solemn bow. "Yes, Colonel. And this attempt tells us something very important." He began to pace, not theatrically, but with intense clarity, every movement part of the deduction taking shape before our eyes. "Consider, if Clara dies, the suspicion of her guilt seems complete. The murderer would be safe. The inheritance matters would go forward without objection. The household returns to silence. Only one person benefits from such an ending." Evangeline flinched, just slightly. Poirot saw it, but he did not accuse, not yet. Instead, he turned, slowly, to Reeves, who stood in the corner of the room, hands folded, posture composed. "You brought tea earlier, Reeves." "Yes, sir." "You poured for Madame Godfrey yourself." "Yes, sir." Poirot's voice dropped, quiet, devastating. "And you brought milk, did you not?" "Yes." Poirot held his gaze a moment longer, then turned to the writing desk. Clara's diary lay open. Poirot did not touch it. He simply read. Her final written words were visible at the top of the page. If he signs the will today, then all is lost. Poirot closed his eyes. Just once, as though confirming something deeply, privately known to him. He looked back to Reeves. You are a man accustomed to being overlooked, he said softly. A man in every room, yet invisible. A man who carries the keys, the cups, the letters. He stepped closer. And a man who hears far more than others realize. Reeves' expression did not change, but his breath did. It hitched, the faintest, smallest sound, but Poirot heard it. We all heard it. Evangeline gasped. Colonel Godfrey staggered back as though struck. Poirot did not yet name him. He simply said, "The murderer is afraid." Reeves's jaw clenched. Poirot's voice, soft as rain, finished. And fear, mes amis, reveals everything. The doctor arrived within minutes, a thin, spectacled man with an air of quiet competence. Clara Godfrey was carried gently to the Iton guest room adjacent to the landing, where the doctor administered treatment and assured us she would recover consciousness by morning, if undisturbed. The laudanum had not been enough, by some providence, to end her life, but the intent was unmistakable. Inspector Galloway was determined to act at once. I'll take the butler in for questioning, he declared, puffing himself up like a kettle about to whistle. A man in his position, access to everything, motive to secure advantage for the girl, perhaps. Poirot raised a hand. Just a hand, one gesture, and the inspector stopped speaking. No, 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 you think too quickly, always too quickly, Poirot murmured. Reeves is connected, but not by greed, not by inheritance, not by personal gain. He turned to the colonel. You must tell us the truth now. Colonel Godfrey looked exhausted, older than he had when we arrived only hours earlier. I don't know what you mean, he said, but the words were hollow, rehearsed. Poirot nodded, as though expecting exactly that. He moved to the library once again. We followed. The colonel reluctantly, Evangeline hesitantly, Inspector Galloway indignantly. Reeves came last, silent as always. Poirot stood before the desk, before the blotter with the faint indentation of writing. Hastings, he said, the graphite, if you please. I took a soft pencil and a sheet of thin paper from Poirot's case, which he always carried, much as a soldier carries ammunition. Poirot laid the clean paper gently atop the blotter and shaded lightly, back and forth, in patient, delicate strokes. Slowly, the shape of words emerged, as though a ghost had begun speaking from the fibers of the page. Avery's handwriting, unmistakable. She knows. She has found out. The room went very still. Poirot stepped aside so each person could see the words. She knows. She has found out. The repetition, in silence, carried accusation. Clara Godfrey. She knew something, and Avery knew she knew. Poirot spoke softly. Lionel Avery did not come merely to discuss the will today. He came because something had changed. Someone had revealed something to Clara Godfrey that should have remained hidden. Something that, once known, placed someone in danger. Evangeline was pale now. Not with anger, but fear. What did she know? She whispered. Poirot's eyes flicked upward. Ah, the question he had been waiting for. You ask, Poirot said gently, as though you do not already know. Evangeline flinched. Poirot turned, not to Evangeline, not to the colonel, but to Reeves. You have served this household for how many years? 32, sir. And in that time you have seen everything, lovers' quarrels, illnesses, finances, betrayals. A flicker, just a flicker, crossed Reeves' steady expression. Poirot's voice softened further. You cared for Clara. Greatly. Reeves swallowed. Not denial, not yet admission, but reaction. Poirot continued. You saw her fade. You saw the Colonel grow weary of her sadness. You saw the loneliness that settled on her like a veil. The Colonel closed his eyes. Evangeline bowed her head. Poirot did not look away from Reeves. And when Evangeline came, lively, kind, capable, you saw the Colonel turn toward her instead. The truth slipped into the room then, not explosive, but quiet. I felt it as one feels the closing of a door. Reeves's voice, when it came, was low. She suffered, he said. Mrs. Godfrey says she suffered while they. But Poirot raised a finger once more, not to silence him, but to direct him. Yes, Poirot said. And you believed you were protecting her, shielding her. But Monsieur Avery, he knew. He saw. He was a man who watched the weaknesses of others, and he discovered yours. Reeves' hands were no longer still. He threatened to tell, Reeves whispered, to reveal everything, the Colonel's intentions, the new will, Evangeline's, her presence. He would have destroyed Madame entirely. Poirot nodded, and then he surprised us. He stepped closer to Reeves, closely, close enough to touch him. And so you killed him. Reeves closed his eyes, but Poirot did not accuse further, because something was wrong. Poirot's voice sharpened. No, not quite. You did not kill him for Clara. You're too honest, too loyal, too straightforward a man. Reeves opened his eyes slowly. Something lost there. Poirot stepped back. You killed because someone asked you to? Evangeline gasped. The Colonel staggered and gripped the back of a chair. Poirot turned, slowly, to the doorway. Clara Godfrey stood there, awake, pale, still, watching the rain. She spoke at last. Her voice was calm, not weak, not broken, clear. I told him, she said. I told Reeves to do it. The silence that followed was absolute. Rain tapping softly against glass. Poirot bowed his head, not in triumph, but in grief. For love, he said quietly, for the kind of love that suffers in silence. Clara nodded. He would have taken everything, she whispered. Not the house, not the money, everything, my dignity, my place, my life. Evangeline stared, tears rising. The Colonel covered his face. Reeves bowed his head. Poirot lifted his gaze. The truth, mes amis, is not finished, but now we see the heart of it. We assembled in the drawing room for the last time, though assembled is perhaps not the right word. We did not gather by choice. We gathered because Poirot willed it. And when Hercule Poirot wills a gathering, one does not refuse. Clara Godfrey sat in the high-backed chair near the window, hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed, not on the rain now, but on the people in the room. She looked composed, not cold, not numb. Composed as though a decision had finally settled into place inside her. Reeves stood behind her. Not beside her. Behind her, like a sentinel who had already chosen the end of his road, whatever it may be. Colonel Godfrey was by the fireplace, though I doubt he felt its warmth. He looked hollowed, a man suddenly aware that the world is larger, darker, and more fragile than he had believed. The edges of his certainty had frayed. Evangeline sat rigid, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I could not tell if she was terrified of what would be revealed, or of what would remain unsaid. Inspector Galloway waited grudgingly, notebook in hand, frustration wrestling with reluctant respect. He was beginning at last to understand that Poirot's methods were not indulgence. They were precision. Poirot stood in the center of the room, small and immaculate, every line of his suit in perfect order. It struck me then that he seemed not triumphant, but sorrowful. He loved truth, but he did not enjoy the wounds it exposed. He began quietly. There are two crimes we speak of today, one that has been committed and one that was attempted, and both, mes amis, were born of the same emotional poison. He turned to the colonel. You loved your wife once, deeply, and she loved you, but sorrow came to her, not suddenly but slowly, like fog gathering over water. She withdrew, not because she ceased to care, but because she could not find the way back to the world. The colonel's expression trembled. I know, he whispered. I know. I did not know how to reach her. And so you stopped trying, Poirot said. Not harshly, simply truthfully. And in your loneliness, you turned to Mademoiselle Drew. Evangeline flinched but did not protest. It was not an affair of passion, Poirot continued. It was an affair of warmth, of being seen, of being listened to. But such warmth, given in the presence of a suffering wife, becomes a cruelty, whether intended or not. Clara spoke then, her voice clear. It was not the love that hurt me. It was the replacement. The colonel bowed his head, stricken. Poirot nodded gently, then turned his gaze to Reeves. You, Reeves, saw this pain. You saw Madame losing everything that tethered her to this world. Her identity, her home, her dignity. You loved her, not romantically, but with loyalty, devotion, constancy. You loved her more faithfully, perhaps, than her own husband. Reeves closed his eyes. Just once. Poirot continued. When Lionel Avery discovered the intimacy, emotional or otherwise, between the colonel and Mademoiselle Drew, he saw opportunity. He used it to persuade the colonel to change the will. Not for Evangeline's sake. Avery cared nothing for her, but for legal control, influence, power. A solicitor with a fragile marriage at his disposal is a dangerous creature. Colonel Godfrey made a sound of pain, a quiet, breaking sound. Poirot spoke more softly now, the tone of a man revealing something delicate. Clara discovered the truth. She confronted Avery, and she told Reeves. Clara's eyes lifted to Reeves, and this time the expression between them was unmistakable. Shared suffering, shared guilt, shared love. But, Poirot held up a finger, Madame Godfrey did not ask Reeves to kill Avery. No, she simply said that she could bear no more. Clara's voice was barely more than breath. I did not say the words. I did not need to. He understood. Poirot nodded. And so Reeves took the letter opener. He entered the library quietly. Avery was turned away. One swift motion, planned, precise. And it was done. The room did not move. No breath, no gasp, only the soft ticking of the clock. But the murderer did not attempt to poison Madame Godfrey. Poirot continued, turning his gaze now, slowly, toward Evangeline. Evangeline's face drained of all color. Poirot's voice remained calm. Mademoiselle Drew brought the laudanum. She placed it in the tea, because Reeves killed for love. But you tried to kill for fear. If Clara lived, the truth would emerge. The inheritance matter would unravel. You would be cast out. Again, unseen, unwanted, forgotten. Tears spilled, silent, unrestrained, down Evangeline's face. I couldn't go back, she whispered. Not to nothing, not again. Poirot gave a small, sorrowful nod. The crime of Reeves was loyalty twisted. The crime of Mademoiselle Drew was desperation made reckless, both tragic, both human. He stepped back. The law will take one. Life, the other. There was no dramatic outcry, no collapse, only quiet. Evangeline wept softly. Reeves placed his hands behind his back for shackles that had not yet been offered. Clara closed her eyes, but did not weep. The colonel knelt beside her, not as a husband claiming his wife, but as a man petitioning forgiveness. Poirot looked toward the rain-washed window. Human hearts, he murmured, are the most fragile instruments, and the most dangerous. It was near midnight when the house at Willowbank Terrace grew still again. The storm outside had softened to a fine mist, the rain now barely more than a memory pressing against the darkened panes. The air inside the drawing-room remained heavy, though not with dread now, but with consequence. Inspector Galloway, after a long and reluctant silence, stepped toward Reeves. "I'm afraid," he said heavily, "I must place you under arrest for the murder of Lionel Avery." Reeves nodded once. Not as a man defeated, but as a man who accepts a debt long owed. "There's no need for handcuffs, sir," he said quietly. "I will come willingly." Before Galloway could escort him out, Clara Godfrey rose from her chair. "Wait." Reeves turned to her, and in that moment, for the first time since we had arrived, she looked at him. Fully. Directly. The quiet, unwavering gaze of a woman who has nothing left to hide. "You should not have done it," she said softly. Reeves held her gaze. "I know." She stepped closer. "But I understand why you did." Something passed between them. Not romance, not longing. Something deeper. Recognition that they had lived, side by side, in the same grief, the same silence, the same dimming of the world. Reeves bowed his head once and allowed the inspector to lead him away. The door closed behind them. Evangeline Drew remained seated, as though held there by invisible weight. Galloway had not arrested her. Not yet. The law would require deliberation, statements, examination of Clara's near poisoning. Poirot had offered no official condemnation, merely truth. The law would decide her fate. Yet Evangeline did not look to him, nor to the inspector. She looked only at Clara. "I am sorry," she whispered, "for what I did, for what I was, for what I wanted." Clara did not answer immediately. Then, "We were both drowning," Clara said. "You reached for something to hold you. I reached for nothing. That is the only difference." Evangeline's shoulders shook. Not the violence of sobbing, but the quiet collapse of a life that has finally stopped pretending. Poirot stepped toward her, his voice gentle, astonishingly gentle. "Mademoiselle Drew, you are young. You believed love could replace emptiness. You believed recognition would heal you. These are tender and human mistakes, but they led you to a terrible act." A tear slid down her cheek. Poirot continued, "You must surrender yourself before the law. You must accept what comes, and then, when the years have softened what now feels unbearable, you may yet begin again." Evangeline nodded, slowly, painfully, as though each movement cost her breath. It was Colonel Godfrey who finally spoke. "I will see that she has counsel," he said hoarsely. Clara looked at him, only briefly, and for the first time, there was no accusation there, no pain, only exhaustion. Poirot inclined his head. "You will do what is right, Colonel. Not for yourself, not for forgiveness, but because decency is sometimes all that remains to us." Later, Poirot and I stood in the entrance hall, preparing to depart. The house was silent now, though not empty. Lives were still inside it. Wounds, futures, consequences. And yet, the air felt lighter. The storm had passed. I turned to Poirot. "There were moments," I admitted, "when I thought you were wrong, when I believed Clara had done it, when I believed Reeves acted alone, when I believed Evangeline was merely a victim." Poirot smiled, the faintest curve of his mustache. "Cher Hastings, you always see the pieces, but not the design. It is your great charm, and your great limitation." I bristled, faintly. "Then what was the key? The first clue, I mean." Poirot lifted one elegant finger. "The rain." I blinked. "The rain?" "Yes. The woman who watches the rain," he said softly. "A woman who watches the world pass, but does not move. A woman who has ceased to act. A woman resigned. Such a woman does not kill. She endures. She sinks, she suffers, but she does not stab. It was her nature that solved the crime. He stepped toward the door. And Reeves? His shoes were dry when we found the body. The library windows were open. The rain drifted inside. Anyone who had been outside would have left damp prints. Reeves had not left Clara's side before the murder. I could read it in the way she held herself. Their loyalty was shared, not hidden. His violence was her grief given shape. But her hands were clean of the act. Poirot paused, adjusting his hat. And Evangeline? Ah, when someone tries to disappear, Hastings, watch the desperation in their eyes. The laudanum was not Reeves' way. It was hers. We stepped outside. The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving the air cool, sweet, faintly fragrant with wet earth. Poirot breathed it in. There is always a moment, he said quietly, when a heart breaks. And if one listens closely, one can hear the sound. He looked back at the house one last time. Come, mon ami. There is nothing more to be done here. And we left Willowbank Terrace behind us, a house forever changed by what had been hidden and what had been revealed.